All right, so we're going to look at now transport in plants. We talked just briefly a minute ago about how that happens, okay, the osmotic pressure created in the leaves. Okay, we're going to go into more detail about it here. So we need to understand how transport within a cell, okay, like diffusion and osmosis and that kind of stuff, is similar and still involved in transport in a multicellular organism. Okay, even in animals where we have an active circulatory system, that's only pumping blood around the body. Stuff still has to get out of the blood and into the cells by either diffusion or osmosis or active transport. Okay, those processes are still being used in a multicellular organism. Okay, they just have other methods as well. Okay, we're going to look at how nutrients, water, sugar, and minerals, okay, are transported in vascular plants. Now, what does the term vascular mean? That's muscular. Yeah, veiny, actually. Vascular means veins or tubes, okay? And so plants that have tubes are vascular plants. The majority of our terrestrial, that is land plants, are vascular plants, okay? There are some that are not. Mosses are not. Liverworts, hornworts, and mugworts, okay, are all examples of plants that do not have vascular tissue. They're basically like small undergrowth, like right on the ground kind of plants that don't grow very tall. They can't grow tall because they don't have tubes. Okay? There's no ability for them to transport material because they have to use diffusion. All right, and then we're going to look at what forces are involved in this transport. Spoiler alert, we already talked about them. It's mostly what? Osmotic pressure and osmosis, right? Okay, so the big problem that a terrestrial plant faces is that the resources it requires are spatially separated. That means they are not in the same place. The water and nutrients are in the ground. The light, oxygen, and carbon dioxide are above the ground. Okay, that creates a problem. So there has to be specialized cells that can acquire the needed materials as well as transport them from one place to another. Okay, the challenge here is that the part of the plant that's capable and surrounded by the nutrients and water is not capable of carrying out photosynthesis, which means it can't feed itself. Similarly, the parts of the plant that can carry out photosynthesis are not surrounded by water and minerals, so they have to be supplied by it from somewhere else. And then there's the highway that kind of transports between the two, which is the stem, right? So they are spatially separated. The soil provides the water. Okay, the body of a vascular plant is then differentiated into a subterranean or underground root system and an above ground shoot system where the leaves and stem and stuff would be. Plants have a lot of adaptations that they've evolved over millions of years to deal with this problem. Okay, strawberries, for example, and raspberries as well, are crawlers. Okay, and how many people have raspberries or strawberries at home? Okay, you ever notice how like you got a patch of raspberries, but they start popping up in the middle of your lawn? Okay, well, strawberries will do the same thing. Okay, they won't pop out into your lawn, but they'll put out what's called a stolon, which is kind of like a little shoot that is adventitious. That means it's looking for a new place to acquire water and minerals from. Okay, so it puts out this little shoot, and if it encounters soil that's, got those resources, it puts down roots right there. Now it's still connected with the original plant through that stolon. So it's like a tube that can transport materials from that other spot back to the original spot, especially if this original mature plant has maybe used up a lot of the resources in that area. It can be supplied by this. Okay, so this is just an adaptation to when you use up the resources in one area. What do? Well, you just kind of reach out and find a new area. Oh yeah, they would most likely survive on their own unless the resources are so depleted where the other one is. Now, again, it's pretty unlikely that it'd be so depleted here and then 3 feet away that'd be great. I mean, it could happen if one is in the shade, right, and one isn't, but yeah. Okay, other advantages, or adaptations on advantages that plants have tried are to store food in their roots over, let's say, over a winter or for periods of time where maybe sun isn't going to be available, okay, or things like that. So there are some plants like cassava that'll do that, and potatoes. Okay, potatoes are a prime example of an energy storage device used by a plant. Okay, so what a plant does is during the summertime, it's carrying out way more photosynthesis and making way more energy than it needs to survive. So just like people, it stores that energy, right? What do people store it as? Fat. Yeah. Okay. Fat is an energy storage molecule. The body doesn't want to waste anything. So, well, we'll just put that away for later. Okay. Well, plants will do the same thing, but they don't have fat. They use starch. Okay. So starch is like plant fat. It's used to store energy. Okay. And that's what a potato is made out of. Starches. Okay? So when you have a potato, that's a high energy food, right? Because it's basically what a plant has been using to store its excess energy. Now, if you take that potato, cut it up, and fry it in fat, it has even become more energetic. Okay? That's why when you're on a diet, the last thing you want to eat are deep fried fries. Okay? Because you've just taken a high energy food and dipped it in a higher energy food. Okay? And then combined the two. Everybody kind of follow? All right. Okay, so we typically call any underground energy storage molecule a tuber. Okay, a carrot, a turnip, a beet, they're all kind of the same thing. Okay, they're all storing material inside of them as starch. Okay, another way to store energy is at the base of the leaves. Okay, onions do this. I know the onion is actually underground, but it's actually the base of the leaves. Okay, that swells up and stores a little bit of starch, but a little bit more sugar, which is why onions are sweet compared to the bitterness of a potato. All right. Like if you just ate a raw potato, it's quite bitter. Okay, you cook it, it tastes a little bit different.
Did you say that every plant is vascular except for moss?
Terrestrial plants. If it can grow taller than like a foot, it's a vascular plant. Yeah. In fact, there's some that are less than a foot that are still vascular. There's not a lot of plants on land that aren't vascular because the vascular plants outcompete them most of the time. Right. All right, so does that make sense there? So just some adaptations that terrestrial plants have had to use. Okay, other adaptations. The resources a plant requires are light, water, carbon dioxide. Okay, essentially those are the three things. I mean, certainly some nutrients from the soil, right? But there's competition for those resources between plants. I know it's hard to think of plants competing with each other because they just kind of sit there, but they do compete with each other. Okay, they spread out roots and they try and get more territory, where their root system is active. They try and get taller. If they get taller, they get more what? Sunlight. And they might even shade out their competitors. Okay, there are other plants that are growing in the same place. Now, there are some plants that are, they prefer to grow in the shade. They don't need as much sun. But if we're talking about strictly competition, the taller you get, the more sunlight you're going to acquire, the more photosynthesis you can carry out. So, in order to support a very tall plant, Turgor pressure and cell walls are not going to get that done. Okay, Turgor pressure and cell walls, okay, are maybe good enough for kind of like this plant a little bit. Okay, you can see these plants over here by the window, right? They're about as tall as softwood can get. Okay, and they're supported mostly by Turgor pressure and cell walls, right? So you can see once they start to get tall, they just bend, right? In fact, these used to be a lot taller, but they all just fell over, so I cut them off and stuck them back in the ground. That's another interesting thing plants can do. Okay, with this plant, if I cut it off and stick it back in the ground, it'll keep growing. Pretty funky, because this whole thing of plants used to be one plant. Okay, yeah, but over the years, I just kept chopping it off. It's older than you guys are. It would be about 19 years old. Yeah. It was in my apartment my last year of university. Yes, but they produce it. Yes, because once they make the sugar, they still need the oxygen to burn it. Right? Yeah, they need those things because they can produce their own oxygen. It's not a raw material they have to have because they can produce it themselves. Yeah? Yep. Yep. They can, but again, that means they had to have the sugar before, right? Like initially, at least, they have to have carbon dioxide to make the first sugar. Yeah. Okay. That's why a plant that's talked to grows better. They've actually done studies on that. If you talk to your plant, you're crazy, and it will grow better because what are you giving it? Yeah. I actually saw a really interesting one where they were looking at whether the tone of your voice mattered. So they had like someone who was whispering softly, someone who was saying nice things, someone who was shouting. Someone was like it made no difference. The plants didn't care. Okay, there was no like emotional like factor to plant growth. Any talking to the growth to the plant affected it equally. Okay? But it would have been interesting to watch someone shout at a plant for weeks on end. Okay? Well, they can still synthesize the same kinds of things we can. They can synthesize proteins and they can synthesize starches and all that kind of stuff. They make all of that using the different parts of the cell. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, yep. Okay, but they're taking either from the atmosphere or from the soil.
What's the plant's favorite drink? Root beer.
That's terrible. That's terrible. Absolutely terrible. Okay. All right. So one of the adaptations then is this stuff here. Okay, and it's called lignin. Okay. And lignin's a hard material. It's kind of a protein, and what it does is it cements cell walls together. All right. So if you got a whole bunch of cells and the cell walls are stacked, it would be like just stacking a bunch of bricks. Okay. But if you don't mortar the bricks together, it's easy to push them over. Okay, but if you mortar the bricks together, that's the gray, the cement-like stuff that you put between them, then they become very solid. Lignin is kind of like that. It's kind of like mortar, okay, that holds and solidifies and makes the multiple cell walls really like one big strong structure. Okay, that's what produces wood. Okay, it's the presence of lignin in the cell walls that makes a plant a woody plant versus a green plant. Okay, so in order to have like that the type of the trunk of a tree or something like that, lignin has to be present, and that's much stronger. Now, is it still flexible? Yeah, I mean, watch a tree in the wind, right? It can still bend and it can still stretch and move around. Okay? It's very flexible, but it's also very strong.
How does it not like die? Like, can it still like exchange stuff like living?
Well, but again, the exchange is only occurring through the leaves. The trunk of the tree.
Back to cell, like how does it get all its nutrients and stuff like it's cemented in?
The center part of the tree where the xylem is, those cells are actually dead. Okay, so the wood-like part of the tree is actually not so well, not completely dead, but it's not living very much. Most of what it gets would be exchanged through the tubes, so it would come out of the tubes and in. Only the outer part of the tree, okay, the very outside layers where the phloem is actually like really living cells. All right, so that's why you can see like when a tree grows, it gets the rings. That's marking where the outside of the tree was each successive year, where the living part of it was. So as it grows, the inside part is kind of dead. That's why an old tree might be rotten in the middle. Okay? If you've ever cut down a really old tree, okay, the inside of the tree, sometimes the middle of it is rotten. Okay? And the rest of it's still alive, but the middle of it has been dead for so long, it's actually rotten in the middle. That's where like ants will get in and stuff like that. No, the phloem is right behind the bark. The xylem is basically in the middle. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Turgor pressure. We talked about Turgor pressure. That's an adaptation of plants to help support themselves, but it can't support a very big, heavy plant that's very tall, right? It can support a small plant, okay, that's maybe, let's say 2 feet tall, something like that. But beyond that, it's not enough to hold the plant up, especially if it has large leaves. So you can see here that in this situation, in this picture here, the water vacuoles, and someone was asking, could there be more than one? Yes, there certainly can, okay, are all full. And they're pushing everything against the cell walls. Okay? As the plant starts to get water deprived, that pressure is going to reduce. It doesn't look a whole lot different in the second picture, but you can see that the plant is starting to wilt. Okay? When the plant is in extreme distress for water, okay, the water vacuoles are nearly empty, and the cell membrane actually starts to pull away from the cell wall and actually like pull the cell wall in a little bit, and that makes the plant just fall right over. Okay? Can you rescue the plant from that? Yeah, you give it a little more water, those vacuoles will fill right back up again and it'll come back. Okay, if it's crunchy, then it might be a little late. Not that I've ever heard of, no. Once it's crunchy. Once it's crunchy and it's dead. Well, water has to evaporate for photosynthesis to occur. If it doesn't have enough water and hasn't been able to carry out photosynthesis for an extended period, the plant's dead. It starves. So, no. Physically dead, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, scream at it or give it mouth to mouth or something. I don't know. Okay, so these are the plants that you see in the room here. That the green bucket over there. Okay, and this one over here. Okay, when they were like really wilty. Okay, because sometimes I forget to water them. Like this was taken like the last week of August when I got back to work, and I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot to come in and water my plants over the summer. Okay, so you can see they were pretty far gone. Like they look pretty sick, but a little bit of water, they perk right back up. These plants take a lot of abuse. Okay, we're actually going to do a lab where I used to. This is where I got these plants from, where we cut pieces of them off and then we put dye in the water and we watch them grow. I used those plants for years for that lab. I've just stopped torturing them. Okay. So Turgor pressure, like I said, is the pressure of water in the vacuoles that supports the cell. Overwatering a plant isn't going to cause the cells to rupture. What it can cause is suffocation of the roots. Okay, if there's too much water surrounding the roots, oxygen and carbon dioxide may not be able to be exchanged by the roots because the roots are still carrying out cellular respiration. So they need oxygen to burn the sugars that are coming from the leaves. If they can't get that, carbon dioxide will build up and they'll asphyxiate in the same way that you or I would asphyxiate if we couldn't get oxygen. Yes. Yes. Mold. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, succulent plants. Yeah, they'll do that. Yeah. Yeah, I can't keep those alive. I always overwater them. Always. It's like don't water it. You have to water it. It's a plant, and I always overwater it. But yeah. Okay. Job of the roots. Roots are highly specialized structures on the plant, but they don't carry out photosynthesis. And it's not that you wouldn't find chloroplasts in a root cell. You can sometimes, but they don't do anything. And they're not usually very green because the chlorophyll is basically inactive, right? To be active, it has to be receiving sunlight. So while you may find a chloroplast or two in a root cell, they're not active and they're not very, very plentiful. Okay, they are a plant cell after all, so they typically can produce them. So what a root cell is basically designed to do is create an osmotic pressure that draws water in, okay, to the plant. Because water has to move from the soil into the plant. Okay, if the surrounding soil is very salty, a plant will struggle to pull water into itself because water is going to want to move out instead. Okay, so they have to use a bit of active transport to set up this osmotic pressure, okay, around them so that water will move in. All right. Now the other thing is the bulk of the absorption of from roots is actually from the smallest roots. Okay, the really big kind of central roots typically are too thick and quite hard on the outside to do a lot of their own absorption. So if you're looking at a carrot, okay, how many people have ever pulled a carrot up? Right? So there's the orange part, and then there's all the little white roots that come off of it. It's the little white roots that are actually doing the bulk of the water absorption for the plant. Okay, they have a way better surface area to volume ratio, okay, in terms of being able to absorb than the central carrot part of the root does. The carrot is actually energy storage, right? It's mostly starch along with some sugars. That's why carrots are sweeter than potatoes. It's a very slow process. They're not like drilling. It's like, a small one got in there, and then as the plant grew, it just forced it apart. Yeah. Because the cactus doesn't use nearly as much water. A cactus is, because it doesn't have leaves, has very different structure in terms of conserving water. So when it's carrying out photosynthesis, it doesn't lose nearly as much. So that water just stays there, right? If a cactus in its natural environment doesn't have to worry about that, right? It never has enough water to drown. But in a pot growing in soil that it shouldn't grow in, it should be like rocky, sandy, dry stuff, not potting soil. We always seem to get them in. Okay, that stuff holds water too well. Okay, whereas the stuff that cacti typically grow in doesn't hold water at all. Okay, there's also different kinds of roots. Okay, there's big central roots, which we call a taproot. And then there are roots like this, which are fibrous roots. Okay? The type of root system a plant has is based on the type of environment that it lives in. Okay? So what kind of plants do you suppose would have a taproot? Carrots are a taproot. Potatoes are actually a bit more fibrous. They will have one kind of central root, but they do have a lot of roots that go off. They're a bit of a combination of both. Okay. Beets, yeah, are a taproot. Radish is a taproot, yeah. Okay. What about a cactus? Would it have a taproot or a fibrous root? Yeah, it actually has a fibrous root system, like the saguaro cactus, like the one that's on the taco time sign. Okay, they have a fibrous root system that can spread up to 50 meters from the plant, but it's only like an inch and a half deep. Yeah, there's no water deep, right? There's no water deep for a cactus, so it's better to have a very spread out root system so that when it does rain, it can rapidly suck up all the water. Okay, now. That's not to say that in the desert there aren't plants that have taproots. There are. But they typically grow in rockier places where they can penetrate into like aquifers and things like that, so underground wells and things. Well, but again, usually when snow falls, the plant is dormant anyway, right? So it's not having to worry about it. It's in a dormant state, it's not absorbing, and it can't absorb solid water, right? It can't absorb the snow. It can only absorb liquid. So if the ground is frozen, it's not a problem. Okay, so there's advantages and disadvantages. A taproot is capable of storing energy and can go fairly deep. A fibrous root system can also get some depth, but typically doesn't, okay? But it can get a much greater surface area for absorption, okay? So grasses, for example, have fibrous roots. Okay, and they intertwine with each other and they prevent soil erosion. A dandelion, on the other hand, ever pull a dandelion? Yeah, it's a big taproot. Okay, same with a Canada thistle. Canada thistle can actually be deeper into the ground than they are taller above it. Okay, I used to work at a golf course when I was in university, and one of my jobs was spraying all the weeds. Okay, or inhaling all those chemicals will get me later, but. So when we would go around and spray stuff, okay, people would say, "Oh, well, why don't you just pull that?" I'm like, "Are you serious? That's a Canada thistle. Like, if I pull that and I leave even this much root in the ground, it's just going to grow back. I need to poison it. Okay? That's the only way we're going to get rid of it." So, they have different advantages and disadvantages. A big tree, like a pine tree or a poplar tree, has a fibrous root system. Some of the roots are very big, but they're near the surface and spread out because that's a better way to support a large plant, especially in the wind. If I had a big tree with one single taproot, as soon as the wind starts blowing and the tree starts doing this, what happens to the root? Yeah, it'll wiggle until it comes out of the ground, okay? Or it'll snap right off, okay? Whereas with a fibrous root system, it's got, a lot more surface area to hold on, okay, than a single taproot would. Yep. Because when the tree was small, those roots were small. As the root gets longer, but yeah, well, it doesn't. Those ones that are wood-like don't do much absorption. They're more for anchoring, right? But they were once small. But as the plant's roots got further away, they have to have secondary growth as they lengthen. So they get. Yep. Okay, and then the stems, the main purpose of the stem is to support the plant and to transport material. So it's support and transport, okay, is what the stem's job is. The stem, sure, the cells there can carry out some photosynthesis, but it isn't their primary job, okay? And the stem often looks quite a bit different, okay, than the leaves of the plant do. It's sometimes a different color, okay, things like that. So it can carry out some photosynthesis, but the bulk of its job is support, which is why the cells have a little bit more Turgor pressure, thicker cell walls, lignin if it's a woody plant, okay, things like that. Okay. The stem is also where new growth can arise. Okay, I mean, sure, new growth always comes from the tips as well. Okay, but we can have buds basically anywhere on the plant, and that helps if the plant is grazed on. Right. So for this plant here, which is a tomato or a bean or something, okay, this branch here is just cut off. All right, so you can see the stump of it here. But there were two buds right here. When that plant got cut off or grazed on or eaten by an animal, okay, these buds here grow to replace the tissue that was lost. Right? This is actually how you can make a hedge thicker. Like if you've ever seen, like some people have hedges around their house. Okay, to make a hedge thicker, you have to actively trim it all the time so that you're making it grow from further back. That gives it a thick on the outside appearance. Okay, the more you trim it, the thicker it will appear. Same with your lawn. The more you cut it, the thicker it'll get. Okay, because it'll grow from further back. It can. It is a really good way to kill a tree. Can't always. See, when I was in university, we had this nice field behind our dorm, and we'd always go back there and play football and baseball and stuff like that. And then the forestry department transported and transplanted a bunch of these old growth trees that they'd rescued from someplace, and they planted them right in the middle of our beautiful football/baseball field. So it's kind of difficult to make a long pass when there's trees around. You run into stuff. We weren't terribly impressed by that, and we had a guy who was in forestry. His nickname was Tree Mugger. And he said, well, we can get rid of those trees. And we're like, well, we can't go out and cut them down. Like, if we go out and cut them down, we'll get caught. Like, someone's going to notice. He said, no, we'll just ring them. Yeah. So just all we did was go out there and we cut rings, just really small ones, through all the way around through the phloem, about that far into the tree, maybe about an inch and a half. Okay. So all we did was cut the phloem so that the sugar couldn't get from the leaves to the roots. And these plants got really, really sick. Then the forestry department came back, and there was articles in the university newspaper about these vandals that had tried to kill the trees. And we're like, crap, this is really going bad. And so what the forestry department did is they came back and they made paper mache. And they put this paper mache over the cuts that we had made. Now, what's paper made out of? Cellulose tree. Yeah. So these paper mache grafts, and they had to come back every couple of days and kind of check on the grafts and add a little bit of water. The tree actually grew right over the graft. You could actually see like the funnies, the cartoons in the tree for a few years afterwards until the tree had completely grown over the graft. So these trees all lived. But no, we didn't try it again because they were kind of a little more, they were supervising it a little bit better after that because they didn't think anyone was going to cut these trees down. Well, we didn't try to cut them down. We tried to kill them quietly. But anyway, didn't work. That's it. Don't tell anybody. Whoops. They're a modified leaf. They're a modified leaf that doesn't carry out photosynthesis but protects the plant from being grazed on. Okay, same with thistle. With cactus. They don't have true leaves. Their leaves are actually the thorns, and they're just there to keep animals from eating them. Okay, for the leaves, we talked about the different layers. This one actually shows the different layers even more clearly than the other diagrams I've showed you. Okay, you've got your palisade layer where they're all kind of packed in really tight. You got your spongy layer underneath. You got your veins and whatever. Okay, and then there's this leaf here. This is the C4 leaf, and the leaf should actually be kind of in quotations. Whoop, I put my green marker down somewhere. Okay, it's not really a leaf. This is a cactus. Okay, cacti don't have true leaves, and you can see that their palisade layer and their spongy layer wrap around the veins, and there's actually big open areas, okay, where there's no water. The gases get exchanged through there. Their stomates are made up of 4 guard cells instead of 2. They've got all these different adaptations for carrying out photosynthesis in 2 separate steps, light and dark and all these kind of things. So we're not even going to go into C4 photosynthesis. Okay, we're just going to worry about standard kind of C3 leaves, okay, in this way, but they look a lot different. Right, guys, I got to get through a couple things, so I'm going to hold off on the questions. I know, but I got to get through some stuff. Like, you guys ask wonderful questions, but we got to get through some things. Okay. All right. So leaves have veins. Those transport the nutrients. Okay. Leaves vary extensively in form, but still generally have, okay, this kind of a shape. Okay. We have the blade. This is the blade. This is the stalk. And where the leaf attaches to the branch, okay, this plate usually kind of a bit of a swelling there, okay, is called the petiole. Okay, grasses don't have a petiole because they don't grow from a branch. Okay, they just have a blade and a stalk. Okay, I sometimes ask a multiple choice question about blade, stalk, and petiole. I mean, that's not too hard to remember. It's just the parts of the leaf. Okay. All right. Okay, so again, guys, did I put that diagram in your notes package? Okay, so. All right, transport in the plants. Now, we talked about this a little bit when we were going over the polar nature of water, okay? But just to give you a better idea of how that process works, this is an electron microscope picture of the xylem, the part of the plant that carries water from the roots to the leaves, okay? So to give you an idea, this is 100 micrometers here, okay? So 100 micrometers is about that much. So how big are the tubes? Tiny. They have to be tiny. Because if they're not, the polar nature of water will not support the column of water in the tube. Okay? If I have a really broad tube, the only place where adhesion can occur is on the outside of the tube. So I have this big column of water that is unsupported, right? And so it'll fall back down. The osmotic pressure can't pull up that much water. It's too massive. Okay? So the tubes have to be really, really small. Okay? So the water can go up those tubes, okay, and it's pulled up there because water is evaporating from the leaves. And when water evaporates from the leaves, that leaves the salt behind and creates the osmotic pulling force that pulls the water up. Okay, all the water is attached by hydrogen bonds all the way down to the roots, and it all comes up like a chain of monkeys. Okay, from the barrel of monkeys when you were a kid. Okay, back down in the roots, okay, we're creating an osmotic pressure that pulls water into the roots and then is relieved by active transport so that water can move up once the water is in there. Okay, we have CO2 and oxygen being exchanged here in step 5. Okay, that would be part of what process? Photosynthesis. Okay, obviously the light is driving the production of sugar, and then sugar is transported back down through the phloem to the roots. The roots use that in cellular respiration. So oxygen comes in, carbon dioxide goes out. All the cells of the plant carry out cellular respiration. They're just using the sugar that the plant produced. Okay. All right, so on the next page there is just a list there that goes with the numbers in that diagram. So you have both. You have that diagram as well as the numbers. Okay, that's transport in plants. So roots exchanging gases, okay, water and minerals being transported up. Okay, and remember that all of this water, okay, and minerals being transported up is caused by osmosis and the polar nature of water. Well, I would want probably more of a detailed explanation that would include both of those. The process of osmosis helps. Osmotic pressure is created here. Describe it all. Okay, we're going to go right till the bell here, guys. I know it's going to be in a minute, but okay. So the two tissues, like I was saying here, the phloem's on the outside. That's why me and the guys in my dorm were able to ring those trees and cut the phloem. The xylem's actually further in. Okay, so the xylem is actually old phloem cells. Okay, so as the tree grows outwards and makes those rings, the phloem becomes the xylem. It's all tubes, okay, but when the phloem is not transporting sugar, the sieve plates disappear, okay, and the tubes are perfect for transporting water. All right, so yeah, the phloem transports the sugar on the outside. That's why when you harvest maple syrup, when you put that tap in, the tap is only about that deep. Okay, people have this idea that you're like pounding this tap like deep into the tree. If you did that, all that would come out of it is like water. Okay, wouldn't work.